What if one of the most overlooked pieces of American history has been hiding in plain sight, inside an old coin jar, a forgotten drawer, or even the pocket change you once spent without a second thought? Tonight, we're opening the door to a treasure hunt built around 5 wheat pennies, 5 small pieces of copper that can carry stories far bigger than their size. But here's where things get interesting. Not every old penny tells the same story, and the smallest details can completely change how collectors look at one. One may seem ordinary. Another may carry a detail hiding in plain sight. And by the time we reach number 1, you may find yourself looking at every old penny differently. So before you dismiss that wheat penny as just pocket change, stay with me. The final discovery could be the one you never expected. Coin number 1. Imagine opening an old coin collection and finding a penny that looks almost too ordinary to matter. No flashy design. No obvious signs screaming for attention. Just a small wheat penny carrying the quiet appearance of another era. But then you turn it over, and suddenly the story changes. This is a 1950 wheat penny struck without a mint mark, with a brown-toned layer visible across the reverse and an attractive overall appearance. At first glance, it may look like nothing more than an old penny that survived decades of everyday life. But that is exactly what makes this kind of discovery so fascinating. Because when collectors examine an old wheat penny, they aren't simply looking at the number stamped on the coin. They're looking at the story. They're looking at how the coin survived. They're looking at its surfaces, its color, its details, its preservation, and the tiny characteristics that separate one example from another. And this particular penny takes us back to 1950. Think about that for a moment. America was changing. Families were saving, working, traveling, shopping, and filling their pockets with coins that nobody imagined would become objects of fascination generations later. A penny could pass from one hand to another thousands of times, disappear into a drawer, fall into a jar, or be forgotten inside an old family collection. And somewhere along that journey, this little wheat penny survived. That alone makes it intriguing. But there's another reason this coin deserves our attention. The absence of a mint mark immediately becomes part of the investigation. Is it simply a normal characteristic of this issue? What does that tell us about where it was produced? And when collectors compare examples from the same era, how much can differences in preservation and appearance change the way a coin is viewed? Those are the questions that make old coins so addictive. Because 2 pennies can have the same basic date, and yet one can attract far more attention than the other. Now look carefully at the reverse. That brown coloration gives this coin a distinctive aged appearance. Instead of looking freshly produced, it carries the visual evidence of decades passing over its surfaces. Time has left its fingerprint, and that's where the treasure hunt feeling begins. Imagine finding this penny today inside a forgotten box of family coins. Would you recognize what you were holding? Would you put it aside? Or would you toss it back into circulation without giving it another thought? That question is what makes old wheat pennies so fascinating. Millions of these tiny pieces once moved through ordinary American life. People bought groceries with them. Children carried them. Store clerks counted them. Families dropped them into containers and forgot about them. And decades later, collectors can look at surviving examples through an entirely different lens. Suddenly, that little penny isn't just money anymore. It's a survivor. It's a snapshot of an earlier America. It's a piece of a collecting history that has traveled through generations. And the most fascinating part is that the coin doesn't need to look spectacular at first glance to deserve a second look. Sometimes the clues are subtle. The date, the mint mark situation, the surfaces, the color, The condition, the overall eye appeal. Every detail adds another piece to the puzzle. And when you're hunting through old wheat pennies, that puzzle is exactly what keeps collectors searching. Because you never know when an overlooked coin will turn out to be the one that makes you stop and say, "Wait, what exactly am I looking at?" That is the moment every treasure hunter wants. Now, there's something else about this 1950 example that makes the story even more interesting. Its fine condition. After decades of existence, surviving with recognizable details and an attractive appearance gives the coin another layer to consider. Condition doesn't magically transform every old coin into a fortune, but it can be an important part of the collector conversation. And that's why you should never judge an old wheat penny only by its age. Old does not automatically mean rare. Rare does not automatically mean valuable. And valuable does not always mean obvious. The real excitement comes from putting all the pieces together. That's what we're doing here. We're not simply looking at a penny. We're investigating a survivor from 1950, a coin that has crossed an enormous stretch of American history to reach the present day. And if the figure associated with an example like this reaches the kind of extraordinary level collectors dream about, the question becomes even more fascinating. What hidden combination of characteristics made someone take this tiny piece of copper seriously? That's the mystery. And we're only at coin number 1. Because if this is where our 5-coin journey begins, imagine what could be waiting farther down the list. There are 4 more wheat pennies still hidden inside this countdown. Different dates, different stories, different characteristics, and potentially completely different reasons for collectors to pay attention. So don't look away. Keep that old coin jar nearby, because after seeing this 1950 wheat penny, you may never look at a wheat penny quite the same way again. And remember the date, 1950, a tiny coin, a massive journey, and one more reminder that sometimes the most fascinating treasures don't announce themselves. Coin number 2. Now the hunt takes an unexpected turn. Because the first coin showed us how easily an old wheat penny can survive decades and still attract attention, but this next discovery tells a very different story. Picture a worn coin resting at the bottom of an old jar. Its edges have seen years of handling. Its surfaces aren't perfectly untouched. Its once bright appearance has long disappeared beneath the unmistakable signs of circulation. And yet, there is something about it that makes you stop. The date reads 1956. No mint mark. A brown layer across the coin. And on the reverse, dark black spots that immediately give this wheat penny a distinctive, aged appearance. At first, those marks might make someone dismiss the coin. It's circulated. It's worn. It's just an old penny. And that is exactly where the story becomes interesting. Because treasure hunters don't stop searching simply because something looks old and worn. They look closer. They ask questions. They wonder what happened to the coin before it reached them. Where did it travel? How many hands held it? How many cash registers did it pass through? How many times was it dropped into someone's pocket, purse, drawer, or coin jar? And how many people looked directly at it without ever realizing that decades later, collectors would still find the story of that tiny coin fascinating? That's what makes old wheat pennies so captivating. Their value as collectibles isn't determined by one simple feature. The date matters. The mint mark situation matters. The condition matters. The surfaces matter. And the overall appearance can become part of the conversation too. This 1956 example gives us a particularly interesting combination to examine. The coin is described as circulated, meaning its surfaces carry evidence of having spent time in everyday use. And honestly, that's part of the charm. Look at those brown tones. Then notice the darker spots on the reverse. They don't make the coin look freshly preserved. They make it look like something that has lived a life. A coin that wasn't locked away immediately after leaving the mint. A coin that entered the real world. A coin that became part of ordinary American commerce. And perhaps that's why discoveries like this create such a powerful reaction among collectors. You're not just seeing metal, you're seeing time. You're seeing wear created by countless moments that nobody thought would ever matter. Imagine someone receiving this penny decades ago. Maybe they didn't even look at the date. Maybe it went straight into a pocket with a handful of other coins. Later, it could have been spent at a store. Then another person received it. Then another, and another. The coin kept moving, year after year, decade after decade, until eventually it stopped. Maybe someone dropped it into an old collection. Maybe it was discovered inside a forgotten box. Maybe it sat unnoticed for years. And now we're asking a question that nobody back then could have imagined. Was this little wheat penny worth taking a second look at? That's the emotional core of the treasure hunt. Because you don't know what you've overlooked until you actually look. And the absence of a mint mark adds another clue for us to consider. It may seem like a tiny detail, but when collectors examine old US coins, small details can become important pieces of identification and comparison. That's why experienced collectors don't simply glance at a coin and move on. They inspect. They compare. They turn it over. They study the date. They examine the surfaces. They look for characteristics that might otherwise disappear beneath years of circulation. And this is where our 1956 wheat penny becomes especially intriguing. Its brown coloration, its dark reverse spots, its circulated condition, its lack of a mint mark. Every feature becomes another piece of the puzzle. But here's the part that should make you pause. What if the coin you're holding right now has a detail you've never noticed? Not necessarily something dramatic, not something that screams across the surface. Something subtle, something that only becomes interesting when you know exactly what you're looking at. That's how a treasure hunt works. You don't begin with certainty. You begin with a question. Could this be something special? And then you investigate. Now imagine placing this coin under a bright light, turning it slowly, studying the reverse, checking the date, examining the surfaces. Suddenly, an ordinary-looking penny becomes an object of investigation. And that's the moment the hunt gets addictive. Because once you start looking at old wheat pennies this way, you begin realizing just how much information can be hidden inside something so small. A single date can take you backward decades. A missing mint mark can become another clue. The surface can reveal how the coin lived. And the condition can tell you something about what happened between the day it was struck and the day you discovered it. This is why collectors can spend hours searching through coins that other people would overlook in seconds. They're not just searching for age. They're searching for the unexpected. They're searching for the coin that makes them stop. The coin that makes them check again. The coin that makes them call another collector and say, "You need to see what I just found." And that's exactly the feeling we want from this 1956 wheat penny. Not because every circulated wheat penny is automatically rare. It isn't. And not because an old date alone guarantees extraordinary value. It doesn't. The real fascination comes from examining the complete picture. The date, the mint mark, the condition, the color, the surfaces, the unusual characteristics, and the story behind the coin. When those pieces come together, that's when the hunt becomes genuinely exciting. And remember, we're still only at coin number 2. That means 3 more wheat pennies remain. 3 more dates. 3 more stories. 3 more opportunities for something unexpected to appear. And if you've already started wondering whether one of your own old pennies deserves a closer inspection, Good, because that's exactly where every great coin hunt begins. Not with a guarantee, not with a promise, but with curiosity. So take one last look at this 1956 wheat penny. A brown-toned, circulated survivor. Dark spots across the reverse. No mint mark. A tiny piece of American history that traveled through an unknown number of hands before reaching the present. And according to the value supplied for this video, this particular example is associated with a staggering $170,600 figure. But don't let that number be the only thing you remember. Remember the lesson hidden behind it. Never assume an old wheat penny is just a penny before you look closely. Coin number 3. There are moments in a coin hunt when you stop searching for something shiny and start searching for something that has survived. That is exactly where we are now. Because hidden inside this countdown is a wheat penny from an America that feels almost impossibly distant today. The date is 1948. No mint mark. Black and brown spots across the surfaces. Brown spotting visible on the reverse. Even small green dots appearing among the aged coloration. And the condition? Almost fine. At first, someone might see those marks and immediately decide this is simply another worn old penny. But that's the mistake treasure hunters learn not to make. You don't judge the entire story from one glance. You investigate. You turn the coin. You study the date. You examine the reverse. You look at the color. You ask why the surfaces look the way they do. And suddenly, a tiny piece of copper becomes a window into another America. Think about 1948. The country was entering a completely different chapter after the enormous upheaval of the 1940s. The world had changed, American life had changed, and ordinary coins were quietly moving through that changing landscape. A wheat penny could be sitting in someone's pocket while history unfolded around them. Nobody carrying it knew that decades later, somebody might hold that same coin under a light and wonder about its journey. Where had it been? Who had touched it? How long had it circulated? How many times had it been exchanged? And how many people had simply looked at it as one more penny? That is what gives this coin its atmosphere. It isn't pristine. It isn't untouched. It carries evidence of time. The dark areas and brown coloration give it a distinctly aged appearance, while the reverse shows additional brown spots and those unusual green dots that immediately make the surface worth examining carefully. But here's the important part. Aged-looking does not automatically mean rare, and a worn coin isn't automatically valuable. That's why serious collectors don't stop at appearance. They want the complete story. The date is one clue. The absence of a mint mark is another. The condition provides another. Then come the surfaces, coloration, details, and overall eye appeal. Every clue narrows the mystery. And that's what makes this 1948 wheat penny such an intriguing stop in our journey. Imagine finding it inside an old family coin jar. You reach in expecting ordinary change. Instead, your fingers pull out a darkened wheat penny. You wipe away a little dust. You see the date, 1948. You turn it over, and suddenly you notice the unusual coloration. Brown. Black, more brown spots. Tiny green dots. You look again. Then you wonder, how long has this been sitting here? That single question can change the entire experience. Because a coin collection isn't always about finding something perfect. Sometimes it's about finding something with character. Something that looks like it has traveled. Something that makes you imagine the hands, pockets, counters, drawers, and collections it may have passed through. And that's where the emotional side of collecting becomes powerful. You're holding something that was created for everyday use, yet somehow survived long enough to become part of a completely different world. A world of collectors. A world of old coin searchers. A world where tiny differences can make people stop scrolling, stop talking, and look closer. Now take a closer look at the reverse. Those brown spots aren't simply decoration. They're part of what gives this particular example its visual identity. The green dots add another layer to the appearance. And when a coin has this kind of coloration, the temptation is to immediately call it extraordinary. But a true treasure hunt requires patience. You don't assume. You inspect. You compare. You question. That is what separates excitement from careless guessing. And that is exactly how we should approach this coin. The most interesting question isn't simply, is this penny old? Of course it is. The better question is, what combination of characteristics makes this particular example interesting to collectors? Now we're getting somewhere, because that's where the story becomes deeper. The year 1948 places this wheat penny firmly in a fascinating period of American history. The coin's lack of a mint mark gives us another identification detail. Its almost fine condition tells us it has experienced circulation, and its black, brown, and greenish surface characteristics give it an unmistakable appearance. Put those clues together, and you've got a coin that deserves attention. Not because every similar penny is automatically a fortune, but because every individual coin has to be examined on its own. And that is the lesson hidden inside this discovery. Never let a worn appearance convince you that there's nothing worth seeing. Never let a little discoloration make you stop looking. And never assume an old coin is ordinary simply because it doesn't shine. Some of the most fascinating pieces in a collection are the ones that look like they've lived a life. This one certainly looks like it has. Now here's where the countdown becomes even more intense. We're already at coin number 3. The first 2 wheat pennies open the door. This one takes us deeper inside. And according to the figure supplied for this video, this 1948 wheat penny carries a claimed market value of $172,800. But don't let that number distract you from the real mystery. The real question is what makes a tiny coin capture so much attention in the first place. Because when you understand that, you stop looking at old pennies as disposable change. You start looking at them as clues. You start turning them over. You start checking dates. You start examining surfaces. You start wondering what everyone else might have missed. And that's exactly when a simple coin collection can turn into a treasure hunt. But we're not finished. Not even close. There are still 2 wheat pennies waiting. 2 more dates. 2 more stories. And if you've been waiting for the moment when this countdown reaches its most unbelievable discovery, keep watching. Because the final 2 coins haven't revealed their secrets yet. And after what we've already uncovered, there is one question hanging over this entire hunt. What happens when the next forgotten wheat penny turns out to be even more fascinating than the last? Don't look away. The biggest discovery may still be waiting. Coin number 4. Now the atmosphere changes. We've already uncovered 3 wheat pennies with stories hidden beneath their ordinary appearance. But this one feels different. Because the moment you see the date 1942, you're looking at a coin born during one of the most dramatic periods in American history. And yet, the coin itself doesn't look dramatic. It looks old, dark, worn by time. A wheat penny without a mint mark, carrying a deep black shade across its aged surfaces. At first glance, someone could easily dismiss it. That's just an old penny. That's just discoloration. That's just wear. But stop. Look again. Because when you reach this point in a treasure hunt, the obvious answer is usually not the interesting one. The interesting question is, how did this tiny piece of American history survive all these years? Think about 1942. America was living through an extraordinary chapter. Families were experiencing uncertainty. Industries were changing. Millions of Americans were connected to a nation undergoing enormous transformation. And through all of it, ordinary coins continued moving from person to person. This little wheat penny was one of them. It entered circulation as a piece of everyday money. Nobody could have known that decades later, someone might hold it under a light and become fascinated by its age, appearance, and history. That's the strange beauty of collecting. The people who originally handled these coins weren't thinking about future collectors. They were spending them, saving them temporarily, dropping them into pockets, leaving them in drawers, passing them across counters, and eventually many disappeared from everyday life. But a few survived. This is one of those survivors, and its dark appearance immediately gives it a completely different personality from the brighter examples people might imagine when they hear the words wheat penny. The black shade across the surfaces makes it look almost like the coin has been carrying the darkness of its journey with it. Of course, appearance alone doesn't prove rarity. It doesn't automatically establish exceptional value. But it does create something every collector understands: curiosity. Why does this coin look this way? How did the surfaces develop? What condition is it actually in? What details remain? And what would a closer inspection reveal? Those questions are what keep the hunt alive. Now imagine finding this coin in an old box. You reach inside. Among dozens of ordinary pieces, one catches your attention. You pull it out. The surface is dark. The coin feels unmistakably old. You turn it toward the light. And there it is. 1942. You look closer. No mint mark. You turn it over again. The wheat reverse stares back at you. For a moment, you stop thinking about money. You're thinking about time. Almost an entire lifetime has passed since this penny entered the world. Generations have come and gone. Technology has transformed everyday life. Cities have changed. Families have changed. Yet this tiny coin remained. That is why old coins can create such a strange emotional reaction. They are small enough to fit between your fingertips, but their timeline can stretch across generations. And this one comes from a particularly powerful year. That alone makes the date worth remembering. 1942. But there's another reason this coin deserves our attention. Its condition is described simply as old condition, not polished, not presented as a perfect, untouched specimen, just an old survivor carrying the marks of its journey. And sometimes those imperfections are exactly what make a coin visually unforgettable. The dark shade becomes part of its character. The worn surfaces become part of the story. The age becomes impossible to ignore. But here's where collectors have to be careful. A coin shouldn't be judged solely by its color. Dark coloration can have different causes, and unusual-looking surfaces don't automatically mean a coin is rare. That is why identification, authentication, condition assessment, and careful examination matter. The treasure hunt isn't about declaring every old penny a fortune. It's about knowing when something deserves a closer look. And this 1942 wheat penny certainly gives us a reason to look twice. Because we're now approaching the end of our 5-coin journey. And the closer we get to the final reveal, the harder it becomes to ignore the possibility that the most remarkable coin may still be waiting. Think about what we've already seen. A 1950 wheat penny, a 1956 wheat penny, a 1948 wheat penny, and now 1942. 4 dates, 4 different stories. 4 reminders that the history of American coinage can survive in places nobody expects. And according to the figure supplied for this video, this particular example is associated with a claimed value of $244,500. That's an astonishing number. But before you focus on the figure, focus on the coin itself. Because the real fascination is understanding why collectors become interested in particular examples. Why does one old penny get ignored while another gets pulled from a box and examined under magnification? Why does one coin end up forgotten while another becomes the centerpiece of a collection? What tiny characteristic could change the entire conversation? Those are the questions that make this hobby feel like an investigation. And right now, we're standing at the edge of the final reveal. Because there is only one wheat penny left. One final date. One final story. One final opportunity for this countdown to completely change the way you think about old pennies. And after everything we've seen so far, there's something you should remember. The next time an old wheat penny lands in your hand, don't automatically spend it. Don't toss it into a drawer without looking. Don't assume the dark color means nothing. Don't assume the age tells the whole story. Turn it over. Read the date. Check the mint mark. Study the surfaces. Look closely. Because sometimes the most interesting part of a treasure isn't what everyone sees immediately. It's the detail almost everyone else missed. And now we're down to one. The final wheat penny is waiting. If you thought 1942 was the moment this countdown reached its peak, you may want to stay until the very end. Because the crown jewel hasn't been revealed yet. Coin number 5. And now, we've reached the final door. 4 wheat pennies have already taken us through different moments, different appearances, and different stories. But the last coin is the one that brings this entire treasure hunt to its final reveal. Look at the date, 1939. Stop there for a second. This tiny wheat penny takes us back to a completely different America. An America before the world we know today existed. An America where this little coin could have been placed into someone's hand and spent without a second thought. And somehow, it survived. This example has no mint mark, a warm brown layer across its surfaces, and a small green dot that gives its appearance an unusual touch. But there is one detail that immediately changes the way we should look at it. Its condition is described as uncirculated. And suddenly, the story becomes much more intriguing. Because if a coin was intended to circulate through everyday life, how did an example from 1939 survive without experiencing the kind of wear we normally associate with an old coin? Where was it? Was it placed aside early? Was it stored away? Did someone recognize that it should be protected? Or did it simply get incredibly lucky? We don't know. And that's what makes the question so fascinating. Imagine holding this coin in your hand. You're looking at a piece of metal produced nearly a century ago. The surface carries a brown tone. There's a green dot visible on the coin. There is no mint mark, and yet the overall appearance is described as beautiful and uncirculated. That combination immediately creates a different kind of collector mystery. Because condition can change the entire personality of an old coin. A circulated coin tells a story of movement. A heavily worn coin tells a story of use. But an uncirculated example makes you wonder about preservation. How did it escape the countless hands, pockets, cash registers, drawers, and transactions that could have damaged it? That is the question sitting behind this final wheat penny. And now think about the date again. 1939. Someone could have held this coin during an America that looked completely different from ours. The buildings were different. The streets were different. The technology was different. Daily life moved at another pace. And this little wheat penny was there. Then time moved forward. Years became decades. Decades became generations. The coin remained. And eventually it became the kind of discovery that makes collectors stop and take a second look. That's the emotional power of old coins. They don't just survive physically, they carry the feeling of another time. And this one may be especially fascinating because its appearance doesn't immediately look like what you might expect from a coin of its age. The brown layer gives it a warm, aged character. The green dot adds a tiny visual mystery, and the uncirculated condition makes you want to examine every surface more carefully. But remember something important. A strange color or unusual spot does not automatically prove rarity or value. Collectors have to distinguish between natural aging, environmental effects, surface changes, damage, and genuine collectible characteristics. That's why careful examination matters. And that's why the most exciting part of coin collecting isn't simply finding an old date. It's discovering the details that make one individual coin worth investigating. This 1939 wheat penny gives us plenty to investigate. No mint mark, brown coloration, a green dot, beautiful overall appearance, and the claimed uncirculated condition. Put those clues together, and you have a coin that certainly creates curiosity. Now imagine this discovery happening in real life. You're cleaning out an old family drawer. You find a small envelope. Inside are several old coins. Most look ordinary. Then one catches your eye. You turn it over. You see the wheat reverse. You check the date, 1939. You look at the surfaces. You notice the brown coloration. Then that tiny green dot. You inspect the edges. You realize the coin doesn't show the kind of circulation wear you expected. And suddenly, the entire room feels different. Because you are no longer looking at spare change. You're looking at a survivor from 1939. And now comes the question every treasure hunter secretly wants answered. What could a coin like this be worth to the right collector? According to the figure supplied for this video, this example is associated with a claimed market value of $78,400. But here's the twist. The final coin doesn't need to have the biggest number in the countdown to be fascinating. Sometimes the real treasure is the story. This penny takes us further back than the other 4 coins we've explored. It gives us a glimpse into an earlier chapter of American life. And its reported uncirculated condition adds an entirely different dimension to the discovery. Think about that. A coin made for circulation, surviving in an uncirculated state for all these decades. That's the kind of detail that makes a collector lean closer. It makes you wonder what happened immediately after the coin left the mint. Who first received it? Did someone put it into a collection? Was it hidden away in a container? Was it passed down through a family? Or did it simply spend most of its existence somewhere safe and forgotten? We may never know. And perhaps that's part of the magic. Because not every treasure comes with a complete history. Sometimes the missing chapters are what make the discovery feel mysterious. Now look at the journey we've taken. Coin number 1, 1950. Coin number 2, 1956. Coin number 3, 1948. Coin number 4, 1942. And now the final reveal, 1939. 5 wheat pennies, 5 dates, 5 completely different visual stories, and 5 reminders that an old coin can carry far more history than its size suggests. But there's one final thought I want you to take with you. The next time you see a wheat penny, don't rush past it. Don't assume its brown color means nothing. Don't assume its age tells the entire story. And don't assume an ordinary-looking coin deserves only an ordinary glance. Turn it over. Check the date. Look for the mint mark. Study the surfaces. Pay attention to condition. And if something looks unusual, investigate before you dismiss it. Because the greatest part of a treasure hunt isn't knowing what you'll find. It's realizing that you were surrounded by possibilities you never noticed. And that is exactly what these 5 wheat pennies have shown us. A tiny coin can carry decades of history. A forgotten coin can become a collector's curiosity. And something that once passed through everyday American life can eventually become a remarkable piece of the past. So if you have an old coin jar sitting somewhere in your home, maybe don't ignore it tonight. Take another look, because you never know what story might be waiting at the bottom. And after this final 1939 wheat penny, one thing is certain. The treasure hunt doesn't end here. It may have just begun.